a conversation I had with a studio mixer that I did a record with when I was a kid in my own band. He said something to me once that really stuck with me. He said that the difference between a professional sounding record and a like an amateur sounding or a garage recording or whatever is how the drum kit sounds. The tracks, the guitars, the bass, the keys, all that stuff. You have to make space for all of that stuff. But people aren't bobbing their heads to the guitar player. They're bobbing their heads to the kick and the snare, and they're singing along with the singer. So those are like the two most important things in the mix. And I'm saying that as a bass player too, you know.
All right, welcome back to Vanguard Conversations, whatever number episode we're on now, because I was a music major, so I just don't count at all. It's snowing outside my house in Pennsylvania, and the ground's getting white, and it's quite pretty. It's a couple days before Christmas here, and I am here with Brian Pomp, live audio engineer slash. Well, just Brian. I think you should explain what you do, quite frankly.
I'm a touring live sound front of house sound mixer. Um, I also do some studio mixing, mostly for post mixing for the live shows that I've done in the past when I multi-track record them. And I've got a few things that I've done recently for that. And then when I was younger, I did a little bit more studio mixing, and I just found that I was making more money on tour mixing live. So it was more lucrative at the time. So it just kind of spun out of control, and here I am today.
So I'm going to open with the same question I opened with when I was talking to Chris, since we're on this run of,
hmm
of live front of house guys now. So you got into live sound. So I guess
hmm
my first question for you philosophically is, why do you hate yourself and punish yourself so much?
I think it was,
You have a very different reaction than Chris did.
I mean, rebellion against my folks, against, convention and norms and
Mhm,
just, all the things that were kind of laid out in front of me when I was younger and things I was supposed to do versus what I felt like maybe I wanted to do.
mhm.
Uh, if I would have done what I was supposed to do, I'd probably be a doctor or a lawyer or accountant or something along those lines. Something that my folks would have found more respectable. So, but then,
Gotcha.
playing music in my teens. I mean, I played music since I was a kid, from piano
Mhm.
lessons all the way up, through school, playing clarinet, saxophone, picked up the bass guitar, played drums and percussion in marching band in high school, and then kept playing the bass in my own little local bands around Phoenix. And I was always the guy in the band who just was, I guess, more technically minded. And when we'd go to record, I was always, the one who asked all the questions and was most interested in that process. So it just kind of, evolved into where I'm at today.
That's a shockingly common story with a lot of people. Like,
Yeah.
we all
Oh,
get into
yeah.
the music, and then, like, we realize, oh, either we're not as good at the music making part as everybody else, or like
Yeah.
somebody's gotta push the buttons, and like,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, they're defaulting to me, and it just sticks with me. And now here I am 20 years later wondering where my life went. But I was
Yeah.
talking the why do you hate yourself in more of the perspective from studio to live engineers, because I
Well,
toured once and I was like, I'm never doing this again.
I understand that. I
Yeah.
guess when I first started doing this, there was a very distinct and broad separation between mixing live and mixing in the studio, and what the
Mhm.
goals were, the tools that you had at your disposal to use, and what the end result was supposed to be was much different, and how you achieved it in the studio than it is in a live situation. And I think that there was something about stop, rewind, play, edit, push up a fader, tweak things, stop, rewind, edit, whatever, that I think became monotonous after a while.
Mhm.
And, when you're mixing live, you get in, you set up, tune the room, do a sound check, do the show, pack up, go home. Or, in some cases now, get on a bus and move on to the next city. So there's
Mhm.
a more kind of instant gratification with the
Okay.
live
I can see that.
mixing. versus studio, where it just feel at the time when I was younger. Now I'm older and a little bit more patient, but at the time it felt like it was too repetitive, too monotonous, and the payoff didn't come for like a while. Like it took
Mhm.
sometimes weeks or months for that payoff to hit.
Yeah, and that
Whereas
I totally understand that. Yeah.
whereas in like an arena or a theater or something, once that air starts moving and the crowd starts screaming, that you feel it right away. The gratification is instantaneous.
Mhm. And you get to live vicariously through the musicians without actually having to be up there playing, which is kinda nice too. Although,
Yeah, yeah.
do you miss playing? Like, if you're like me, you probably don't play nearly as much as you'd like to anymore. Do you miss it?
No, not at all.
Okay.
A little bit. I guess I do, but um I don't know. I guess that missing playing thing has just diminished over time.
Okay.
Where if I threw on a bass and was pushed out on stage, I'd probably have a nervous breakdown. But at the same time, like in the last year, I mean, with mixing Olivia, we were playing some pretty big shows and pretty big venues.
Mhm.
And I definitely have nerves leading up to when the show starts, but not nearly as much as I think I would if I was on the stage with everyone looking at me. Even though I'd be like a background musician anyway and in the dark most of the time, it's just
Mhm.
you're up there and everyone's focused on you. When you're at front of house behind a desk, people are looking over you to see the stage. You
Yeah.
just happen to be something else on the floor that they have to look past to see what they're
Gotcha.
looking for.
Gotcha.
So it's a little bit different.
So you mentioned that you're touring with, Olivia now, Olivia Rodrigo specifically.
Correct. Yeah.
For
Yeah.
those not in the know, Brian is the front of house engineer, for that. How many stops was the Guts tour?
95.
Whoo, mercy, and how many months?
Oh yeah. First show was in February, last show was in October.
Oh,
So
okay.
we crammed in a lot in that time.
Yeah, it's not the most grueling tour schedule, but that's up there,
No,
man.
no,
And
definitely not.
considering that,
Yeah.
like, it was a world tour, so you did a
Mhm.
Europe leg and you did, I think, 2 US legs, am I correct on that?
Correct. Yep. And then we
Yeah,
did
man.
Asia and Australia to finish it off.
Did you get to visit any new cities you hadn't before?
Um, Copenhagen.
Okay. What'd you like
Yeah.
about Copenhagen?
I mean, people there are just happy. It's just a happy city. People are just really nice and super cool. And, it's just got a very good culture of, the work-life balance
Mhm.
is very respectable. Like I appreciate, you know, how they really respect their leisure time and use it to the best of their to the best of their ability. So it's like you go to your job, but then at the same time too, it's like you have plenty of time for yourself and for your family, and it's you're not as focused on things like that. And I
Mhm.
find that a lot in the various Scandinavian countries and most of Europe, that people are focused more on themselves than their careers, which
The
there's ups and
career is
downs to
not the
both.
identity.
No, no, no,
Yeah,
no, no.
yeah,
That's just a thing you do to support your life,
yeah.
rather than this thing that you become because that's what you do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very much in agreement with that, having lost myself in running a mic company for 11 years and
Yeah.
slowly digging my way out of that. I also am enjoying the juxtaposition of, oh yeah, we did 95 dates in this many days, and then, oh, and these
Mhm.
people, their work-life balance is so much better. Were you were
Yeah.
you were you kind of jealous as you flew out of Copenhagen? You're like, oh, this is nice.
Yeah, actually, well, I mean, the next stop was Berlin, which is one of my favorite cities in Europe, and my
Okay.
wife met me there, and we celebrated our anniversary and her wedding. No, our excuse me, let me take that back. Our wedding anniversary and her birthday over
Gotcha.
those couple of
Okay.
days. So it was really nice to have her over there and get to hang out in a city that I love,
That's
in a
awesome.
city she'd never been to. So it was just a nice little few days. So that's the other upside of it, is that I get some of that work life balance that I appreciate because,
Mhm.
there's travel days and there's days off. And we were only doing 2 shows in a row, and which I think is really good for a singer.
Yeah.
to only do 2 shows in a row just to not get burned out.
Well, and she's not gentle on her throat with some of those songs from
Oh
Guts
no.
either,
Oh no.
you know?
She definitely puts a lot of noise out.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
good. It's fun.
Yeah, I imagine the crowd pop is a rush every time for you. There's
Yeah.
something atavistic about being in a room with that many excited people that it's hard not to be excited too.
Well, and the demographic of her fans is also kind of adds to that because I would say that the average age of the people in the audience is probably 18 or 19.
Okay.
And, they're mostly girls. So the screaming, the sound that comes from that is especially because like I have to assume that most of the people at this show, it's their first show they've ever been to.
Okay.
And they're seeing the spectacle for the first time.
Mhm.
So it was like stories you used to hear about like when the Who would come on or when the Beatles would come on, and it was just you couldn't even hear what they were doing for the screaming.
Yeah.
So it's similar with this. And I used to mix front of house for Jonas Brothers
Oh,
and
wow.
Joe's
Okay.
other and Joe's other band DNCE, and
Mhm.
it's the same thing, same similar fan base, similar kind of age range. Jonas's age range has grown with them a little bit, but the
Mhm.
screaming hasn't changed. So, I would keep very meticulous notes on my decibel levels at front of house, instantaneously and over times of 1 minute, 10 minute, and 30 minute. And where my show would average around 100 decibels coming off the PA, the average of the audience when they would scream for the duration of the show was anywhere from 108 to 117.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
it's painful.
So from a
It's like,
curiosity
oh
perspective, how do you compensate for that at all somehow as a live sound guy,
no,
or do you just let it ride?
no, you let it ride because the minute you start trying to get on top of that is the minute you lose control of the sound, you lose control of the PA, you
Mhm.
can lose control of your mix, and you lose control. You overexcite the room, so then the reflections increase, and you end up losing. So you just have to
Gotcha.
mix. You just have to mix at what is a normal concert level,
Reasonable level. Yeah. That makes a
and
lot of sense. Yeah.
if they want to hear it, then they know that they just have to chill a little bit just to hear what they have to hear. Because there's a limit to what you can do out of a PA in a certain room
Mhm.
without it just washing out and just then you send all the microphones to the brink of feedback at that point, including the vocal mic. So it's just the more you try to fight it, the more you'll lose. And honestly, all of them are there to see. They're just there to see her,
Yeah, it's not.
and he
Yeah.
hearing her is unfortunately for me as the mixer is somewhat of a byproduct to the fact that they're there to see her and
Uh-huh.
running around the stage and having a good time and just
Well, and shows
being
have
who she
changed so
is.
much in the last 20 years from being, like, music-centric to, like, the music is, like, I don't wanna say it's a sideshow, but I remember, like, my buddy went to a Katy Perry show, and there were, like, trapeze
Mhm.
artists, and, like, it was a circus. It was a whole
It's a
thing, and I'm like,
spectacle.
it real and it's awesome, like, the fact that it's multimedia, but I'm sure as a front of house guy, where your primary objective is the audio,
Mhm.
have you felt that shift over your time as a front of house mixer?
Well, absolutely, especially mixing pop shows.
Okay.
That's they don't nobody will notice when it sounds that great, but they'll notice when it sounds bad. So as
Yeah.
long as it sounds good, you're
Yeah.
generally fine. You
Yeah.
know?
Definitely.
And I still strive to make it sound as great as I can. Um, and that's still my goal. But the thing is that I guess it gives me a certain amount of autonomy because everyone, from the creatives to management to the artists themselves,
Mhm.
they are paying more attention to the spectacle. So it kind of leaves me to my own devices to kind of accomplish what I want to accomplish with the mix,
That's
which I
nice.
appreciate.
Yeah.
And then it generally ends up becoming a consortium between, you know, the one person in management or the label who is actually paying attention, the musical director, and then my discretion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know,
So
I suppose. there's some level of respect for the expertise that a front of house mixer brings to the table that they just, you're just kind of left alone. And I think a lot of people don't know how to address it, and don't know the language enough to ask for what they want. If they hear something, nobody knows how to qualify what they want to hear, because
Mhm.
it's such an esoteric, you know, concept. It's very abstract, I think.
It's the struggle of defining, like, tone and stuff. We have all these words
Mhm.
for tone, like warm or
Yeah.
bright or
Yeah.
whatever, and, like, it's like describing colors by how they smell. Like, it's not you're not
Yeah.
really it's so hard to accomplish because 'cause you're talking about 2 disparate senses, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see how the studio struggle and the live sound struggle in that sense, and the communication sense. So from the communication sense, how do you address that? Like, as a front of house guy, if there is somebody's got a bugaboo about something or the other, but they can't quite fully, how do you deal with that? Just from a human to human perspective, from a communication perspective.
Nod, say yes, agree to what they're asking, and then just carry on.
Okay, that's fair enough.
It's the most placebo thing imaginable.
Yeah.
You just, as long as everyone, I think a lot of people, they don't expect a change. I think they expect the idea to be theirs.
Okay, that's fair enough. It's like that
Do you know what I
Gary
mean?
it's that Gary Larson turn down the suck knob Far Side
Yeah.
comic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. I
So,
talked to, Bob Bullock, who mixed the
mhm,
Monkees and a bunch of other people, and he's a studio guy, and he's a
sure.
mastering guy, and he has a, dedicated rack piece that's just knobs that don't actually do anything
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
for his clients.
Yeah. Yeah. The client compressor,
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly. Yeah, it
I
cracks me
love
up,
that. I
man.
love that.
Yeah, and but that's like it's amazing how often I hear that from studio guys, from live guys. It's like you pretend to adjust the monitor mix or whatever, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done a fair amount of gigs where I've been mixing monitors, and fortunately, the console tips up forward like this, so you
Yeah.
standing behind it it's easier for you to access. But if you're behind it, like if you're on stage watching, you can't actually see what the engineer is doing on the desk. So there's been many a time where I've, looked like I was pushing up a fader, or had a fader that was to a channel that wasn't doing anything, and making adjustments while they're on stage, and they're like, "Oh, no, 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 that's perfect. Thank you."
It's not just
It's
ergonomic, it's
No,
functional
it's
for the
psychological.
communication. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a psychological game that you play, and
Mhm.
I would say the best, probably, everyone's just like, what kind of educational background do you have to do this? And I would say, if well, front of house is a little bit different, but at monitors, if you're going to be a professional monitor mixer, there's not really there's a few schools you could go to learn the technical side of it, but get a degree in psychology if you're going to be a monitor mixer.
Okay.
Seriously. That's the best way to do that.
Learn how to handle people and
Yeah,
their
absolutely.
neuroses. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. So going back to the spectacle part of it, I
Mm.
watch some of the stuff that happens in live shows, and I'm like, how does a front of house guy even begin to deal with that? So what is the biggest pain in the keister part of the spectacle that you've had to adapt to as the as the front of house guy on a specific show? Like, and you don't have to name a name, but is it like that giant projecting part of the stage? Is it like, oh, the artist is just gonna hop on a wire system and just like be out in the middle of the crowd or whatever? Like, what, and how do you adapt to that?
All of the above. So on this last tour with Olivia,
Hmm.
she had a fly gag that we did, which they put her up on a crescent moon, and
Hmm.
had a track that ran around the arena, and she sang two of the quietest songs in the set on that moon.
Oh no.
And that and she passed by the PA system on two occasions, as she left to go one way, and as she arrived on the other side of the stage, and
Okay.
where she landed. And she sang, and it was, you know, a live mic next to the PA. I mean, she was singing, but she was, they were like, ballady, schmaltzy kind of songs, just really,
Hmm.
uh acoustic guitar and then her singing. So it wasn't some of the belting out screaming stuff that I could have handled because there was as much SPL of her voice going into the mic as there would have been that I
Pumping
would
out
have
of the
been combating
speakers.
coming off the
Yeah.
PA. But this was far more sound coming from the PA
Hmm.
hitting the mic than it was her voice. So it was very challenging. We've been using a condenser mic for her for most of the set, but we put her up on just or excuse me, an SM58 when
Hmm.
she goes up on the moon because it has a little bit better rejection. It's a little less bright and articulate, so those horns pointed right at the microphone have less of an effect now on a dynamic mic. So
Hmm.
for those two songs, we were using a 58, and it helped a bit. I just tightened down my uh, expanders a little bit. My Rupert Neve primary source, um, and then the 5045. Just tighten that down a little bit to keep some of the bleed out. And
Hmm.
then and I had a dedicated EQ setting for the PA for those two songs, as well as some changes to her mic. And the songs were quieter by
Hmm.
nature, so it was a little bit easier. But she flew over the crowd
Yeah.
during these songs. So that actually amplified the amount of screaming that went into her mic, which was also problematic. But it was mostly problematic for our monitor mixer because that was just more of the sound spilling into her mic and made it harder for her to hear
Yeah.
herself in her
Yeah.
in-ears.
I can imagine. Yeah.
So we just, we wrestled with it the whole tour, but it was fine. It ended up being fine.
That's such a, like, I always think about the problem solving part of studio engineering, and I think one, there's maybe less complex problems in the studio, and a
Mhm.
lot more of them have to do with figuring out which cable is bad, or than
Yeah.
what you're talking about. But like from a problem solving perspective, just like the tools that you have, you rattled off like 3 or 4 pieces of gear that you had to change specifically just for
Oh
those
yeah.
two tunes. And that's
Oh
such a
yeah.
fascinating, fitting the puzzle pieces together part of it for me. Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about miking on the tour because you talked about changing her vocal mic and stuff like that.
Mhm.
When you go, and you also talked about how you started out doing studio stuff as well. Besides the obvious part of like, yeah, we don't use like ribbon mics on tour necessarily because they're super fragile and they're gonna blow away.
Yeah.
Um, what challenges did you find going from miking in the studio to miking on stage that you had to like adapt your mindset a little bit?
Well, I guess when I first started doing this, it seemed like from what I did in the studio for miking a drum kit, um, in most respectable studios, you'd have a decent selection of, high-end mics between, from like tube mics to ribbon mics
Hmm.
and everything in between. Live, you don't have that luxury as much because the stuff gets beat up. It gets
Hmm.
handled by so many people, and you'll go from like using, you know, depending on what kind of sound you're going for in the studio with like a Tom's, you'll have like a 421, or all the way up to like a Josephson and some other Tom mics that people prefer to use in the studio. I would not feel comfortable putting Josephsons out on stage because
Yeah.
they're fragile, and if you get the wrong people handling them, then you're for the handful of times that somebody hits a tom during a set, you have like $2,000 with the microphone on that drum.
Hmm.
It's just the risk versus the payoff doesn't really match, but in the studio it makes perfect sense.
Hmm.
um so you end up having to pick like things like cheaper mics that clip onto the drum and they don't sound as good, but they're durable and they don't break, and they uh they they don't sound as good, but it just, I think people's expectations of what is supposed to be a live show and how it sounds is
Hmm.
different than what it's supposed to be in the studio on a
Yeah.
record. And when I said earlier that, like, when I first started doing this, the bridge between doing live sound and studio sound was pretty broad, and now it's narrowed over time. So I feel like I am using like higher fidelity microphones now. One, because I'm on tours that I can kind of get away with that. Um, and I can, be very specific about the mics I want to use on a drum kit,
Hmm.
particularly a drum kit. So, the value of those microphones has gone up, and the money value, like the expense of the mics and everything, has increased a little bit, on what I'm able to use. So therefore, you get a little bit better quality. But there's a lot of like, you also have the luxury in a studio of being in a well treated sounding, good sounding room.
Hmm.
Live, you got like guitar amps pouring over, across the drum kit. You've got monitors on stage that are pouring back at the drums. So you got to be a little bit selective about the mics you pick for the drums too, because of their rejection of other,
Yeah.
noise that's coming at them besides the actual drum itself. So, I think that's why a lot of people use a variety of like dynamic mics that have high rejection but don't sound as good as like a ribbon or a
Hmm.
tube or a FET condenser, whatever mic that you'd be inclined to do. But I think I've had the luxury, we haven't had really much as far as like wedges or side fills with this show, and we don't have live amps on stage. So I've been able to get away with putting a little bit higher end stuff on the drum kit to get that extra edge that I'm looking for tonally. Um, and not have to worry about the rejection as much. I mean, it's still a factor,
Hmm.
but it's just I think that nowadays, like I'm a lot more comfortable with having higher end stuff at my disposal than I did when I first started out doing
That
this.
makes a lot of
So I can
sense.
sculpt, so I can sculpt the sound a little bit more and get the tone that I want,
Hmm.
and and achieve kind of the thing that I want to achieve, which is why I've had such great results with the V44S over the drum kit. Like, it's just been incredible. My monitor engineer loves it. He loves it from the perspective of when having the mic right above the drummer
Hmm.
and having the 90-degree angle off of it, he's able to put it in the drummer's in-ear monitors, and they're listening to their kit from their perspective now.
Oh,
But
that's.
rather than having, a couple mics over top of the cymbals on either side,
Hmm.
which I also do, but it's made the monitor mix a lot better for, putting drums in the ears. So that's also been very nice, is having a good stereo mic solution with an XY pattern.
And you're using it in
So
XY90? Is that's how you're using it?
yeah, yeah,
How far
yeah,
do you typically put it? Like, I assume you center it on the snare. Like, how far do you
yeah.
typically put it above the snare? And I'm sure it varies by like how reflective the venue is and all that jazz.
Yeah, I mostly eye it, but I have measured it before. It was like 48 inches.
Okay.
But I also had off the snare head. I
Yeah.
had to I've had to make adjustments because of the way the drummer was playing and some of the flashy kind of like cross stick, just like going down on
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
cymbals and all this fun stuff. Because I'm like, please don't destroy my mic. Please don't break my mic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's more in the line of fire being directly above the drummer's head.
Yeah.
So um that's been a factor, but I mean, it's been good. I've we managed to get through 95 shows without incident, so that was happy.
That makes me very happy as the guy who designed it and hoping it, because most stereo mics that I've ever dealt with, I just had a C20 AKG C24 in here a few months ago for repair. And
Yeah.
the rotation mechanisms are so finicky, they're fragile, they're usually held
Hmm.
in place by like tensioned 1 millimeter wire. So like
Yeah.
that makes me feel very good as the designer going, oh, like it held up for 95 shows. And yeah, like you guys don't, chuck, I assume you don't chuck it in the road case with the
No.
with all the drum
No, no.
hardware. But
No, it gets packed nicely into its wooden box and into its case
yeah,
every
excellent
day.
stuff. I'm glad to
Yeah,
hear you're treating my children well as they get adopted out into the world.
absolutely.
Yeah, Chris was saying that they call theirs the mic of the covenant. It has its own like special
I
drawer and everything, and
Yeah,
somebody
yeah,
sings
yeah.
the Halo theme every time they bring it out of the
Oh,
case.
good Lord. That
Yeah.
that that tracks. Chris actually turned me onto the mic. I was asking him for I we because when we were out on tour together, he was mixing Kelsey opening for Jonas Brothers,
Okay.
and he had a VP88 over the drummer,
That's right.
which
He
is a
was
stereo
talking about
mic,
that. Yeah.
and I think he was probably just looking for a better solution, because I mean the ultimate mic to use for that is C24, but they're so rare. You never get your hands on one,
Hmm.
and who nobody in their right mind would dare take that on tour.
And they're
So it's just
incredibly temperamental.
exactly.
Yeah.
So as much as I would like to fantasize about having like a whole stage full of tube mics all over the place, with having the power supplies all over stage and the extra cable and the extra power on
Hmm.
stage, the difference in a live PA between how a tube mic sounds and how a FET mic sounds is so negligible
Hmm.
that you can get away with putting a FET mic in place of a tube mic and get this very close results. I mean, I
Yeah.
got very close results with this. I was very happy with it. My next move is to I want to because I was doing the V44 over top of the drummer, and then I had a couple of Earthworks mics that were over top of the pairs of cymbals on either side,
Gotcha.
and I had to pay very special attention to phase at that point,
Hmm.
because I was achieving the source in multiple mics.
Hmm.
So I had to be very careful of that. But I was mostly going with the Earthworks and high passing them to death because I wanted to get a lot of that shimmer because I was
Hmm.
getting an overall warm, nice, completely flat response drum kit sound in the V44S, including the cymbals. Um, but I was going for an extra little bit of shimmer
Hmm.
directly off the cymbals, and and rejecting some of the snare drum by high passing it past the point where the snare drum would have conflicted with that.
Hmm.
So I want to change next year for the tour where instead of putting them over the cymbals, I want to do like a chest high mic at a 10 and 2 o'clock position,
Okay.
pointed in at the pointed in at the drum kit towards the center, which I probably would like to use, a pair of V4s for that, and then have the V44S above, and then go for more of an overall kit capture
Hmm.
than like cymbal mics. That's the other thing with going back to the studio days, then versus now doing live. And now the room acoustics play heavily into this, but like I said, in my situation with no live elements on stage, it's actually made it a lot easier for me,
Hmm.
where I'm going for more of a drum kit sound than the individual components of the kit and the sum of those. Because
Yeah.
that's the thing when I used to go to concerts, like when I started going to shows in the 90s and started really getting into this field, I would go to concerts at all varying degrees of size, from like, crappy little clubs in Phoenix that, are 500 cap, all the way up to arena shows and stadium shows and festivals and everything. And I don't know if the technology just hadn't evolved at that point or the PA systems hadn't really evolved at that point. But I noticed that like a lot of shows that I went to, you'd listen to the drums being mixed and you'd hear each drum rather than the sum of all of those parts as a
Hmm.
cohesive drum sound.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I've tried to accomplish with mixing live, is achieving that cohesive drum sound, that entire kit sound that you get in the studio, because you have things like room mics, you have things like, mics that are in the center of the room pointed, low to the ground, pointed up at the kit, or
Hmm.
the varying degrees of overhead mics with like a mono overhead, and then you got your Coles over the cymbals and things
Hmm.
like that. It's just more mics that are at varying distances from the kit, capturing what's happening in the room, and what's capturing what's coming right off the kit as a cohesive thing. And then all the close mics are, just peppered in to kind of like accent the snare, the toms a little bit more. But a
Hmm.
lot of but if you go back to like the John Bonham sound, that's like essentially, the old Glenn Johns,
Hmm.
the the 67s or 87s or whatever he used, one over top of the left, the left side in front of the kit, and one down by the waist behind the drummer on the other side, on the right side. And it's like that captured the kit rather than individual mics capturing just what was coming off like the tom drum head versus the entire tom that's
Yeah.
resonating and emitting sound off the entire drum. And I think that's what was missing a lot of times when I'd hear live mixes is people were emphasizing that close mic sound versus and trying to like mix that, and you just hear the individual hit versus like how its relationship to everything else that was resonating on the
Hmm.
drum kit. And that's what I've been trying to achieve live, and it's definitely had its challenges
Yeah.
because you've had these other things to compete with, like other ambient noise on stage that gets captured by that, but it all kind of lends itself to the whole live show anyway.
That makes a lot of sense. Like that, a live sound is so much different. The way you EQ live, the way you, but
Yeah.
it's funny. You said the same thing that Chris was talking about, which is getting the whole kit image rather than like the sum of a series of parts. And I find
Yeah.
that really fascinating. You've spent a lot of time on this talking about drums, and I'm curious as to your philosophy of that. Like, I think I know why, but I want to hear your answer. Like, you talk about the drums a lot. I know it's probably challenging to capture drums more than like a guitar amp that's sitting off stage in a closet somewhere or something like that. But
Mm.
what is it about drums that's uniquely challenging that keeps you like that? What makes them so important to you in the mix as a front of house guy?
um it might be a conversation I had with a studio mixer that I did a record with when I was a kid in my own band at a studio in Phoenix. He said something to me once that really stuck with me, and it not only applied in the studio, but has applied in my mind to live mixing. He said that the difference between a professional sounding record and a not a not professional, like an amateur sounding or a garage recording or whatever, is how the drum kit sounds. Like
Mm,
the guitars can sound, you can put a cheap mic in front of an amp and go for that as the sound. It won't be the sound, but it'll be a sound. It'll be what you choose it to be, because maybe it's like, you go back and listen to like, like Eagles of Death Metal records, and they were
mhm.
using like little pig nose amps sometimes with a 57 in front of it, but
Yep.
it's the
Yep.
sound that they want for that thing. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Um, so that isn't what sets apart a professional sounding record, because it's like a niche thing. It's a kitschy thing that they're trying to accomplish. But the drums set apart like a professional mix from an amateur mix, I think.
Mhm.
um and anything else just kind of falls into place. People are focused on that. People are listening to the beat. People are listening to the vocals and the drums are the two most important things in a mix, in my opinion.
That I
if
100% agree with that, particularly
if
for
there's
pop
a
stuff.
live drummer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Particularly for
And then
pop stuff.
the tracks, the guitars, the bass, the keys, all that stuff, you have to make space for all of that stuff.
Mhm.
But people aren't bobbing their heads to the guitar player. They're bobbing their heads to the kick and the snare. They're
Mhm.
bobbing their heads to the beat, and they're singing along with the singer. So those are like the two most important things in the mix. And I'm saying that as a bass player too.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
like I would love to hear more bass. Usually, I don't want to hear too many bass solos. As a bass player, I can say bass solos definitely need to be done reservedly.
Yeah.
But it's just I just have always felt that that's kind of when I hear a mix where when I go to a show and I hear a mix where I'm like, that's oof, that is good. It's usually if I strip it down and think about it, it's the drums and
Yeah.
it's the vocal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny when I remember learning from a professor about like when you go to like your B reference monitors, like your Oratones or whatever,
Hmm.
and you turn it way down, you can almost get what you need from the levels just by going, okay, can I still hear the vocal? Can I still hear the most important drum elements? What you mentioned, the kick and the snare.
Yeah.
When you turn
Hmm.
it down to just like barely inaudible. And
Hmm.
if, barely audible, and then if you turn it, you get your balances right there, and then you turn it back up, it usually is where you need them to sit.
Absolutely.
And yeah, because it's almost like your ear is like, okay, I can barely hear this, so I need to be able to pick out what I consider to be the most important information.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I, I you gave me an answer I expected, and also an answer I didn't as a bassist, and I'm also a bassist, so I really appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. and that's the other thing. I'm going to say something that's probably going to sound very controversial, but it's another bit of wisdom that I got from somebody who used to mix and used to play in bands and do a
Hmm.
lot of other things back when I was young. And I believe that bass players make the best mixers, and
Okay.
I can tell you why I think that.
I'll agree with you, obviously, but I want you to explain why. We'll clip this for like TikTok. Super controversial. Let's go.
Yeah. No, I think that bass players make the best sound mixers for the reasons that, like, singers obviously, they're singing because they want to be in the front. They want to be, you know, the face. So they're thinking of that. So anytime that there's a mix happening, they're thinking of that key thing. They're thinking of themselves when the mix comes up.
Mhm.
Same with guitar players, especially lead guitar players. Drummers, I would say they would emphasize. Every drummer I know, when I go to a show and I'm standing with drummer friends of mine and they're listening to it, they are not focused on anything but the drums. Whatever else is happening in that mix is completely irrelevant to how the drums sound. Every single drummer I know, and I'm saying that, and all of you know who you are. Um, they don't pay attention to anything else that's going on in that mix. But the bass player, the reason why people are bass players is because they're kind of I'd say they're probably the most agreeable person in the band. They're the ones who just are kind of like, well, I guess I'll play this thing
Mhm.
that nobody else wants to play because I'm agreeable, and I'll
Yeah, you
just,
can share a monitor channel for me because we don't have enough.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm just here because I just like to be here.
Yeah.
And there's that kind of that generally objective kind of personality trait that bass players have, that I think when they're listening to an entire mix, they um they're listening to the whole thing rather than, you know, the one thing that they're deeply focused on, like a lead guitar player would.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah.
So
I
that's
mean,
that's my opinion.
I can definitely get behind a lot of that, specifically as a bassist, you know.
Yeah.
So, but thinking about it holistically makes a lot
I
of
will get
sense.
nasty text messages about this.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
All three people who see this are going to be so mad at you. You have no idea.
Oh no, I'll put it out. I'll make sure people see this.
We'll just clip that section. I'll take them,
Yeah.
I'll chop it up in such a way that makes you just really come off as super opinionated about it. It'll be
Oh
perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
This is
and
the
I've had this
Instagram game we got to
discussion with
play.
many people.
Yeah.
I know. And
We
I've
got
had this discussion with people before and qualified it that way. And it's hard to argue against it.
I think you make a really good point. I will say some of the best drummers and like the lead guitarists or who are also like the MD, they have that trait as well where they are really thinking holistically. Some of the drummers that I've had the most pleasure of like playing with, because I'm like a thoroughly aggressively mediocre bassist, which is why I make microphones now. That's part of it. That's
Yeah.
how I got here.
Kind of the
That's part of
same.
the story. But like the best drummers I've played with know how to like, oh, they're seeing what I'm playing and they're locking into that and they're
Yeah.
accenting, vocal or guitar parts and they're thinking about it. And those guys tend to be, I would think that they would make equally good front of house guys because they're
Yeah.
thinking about it as a whole, which I think arguably like most players should in a group, but not everybody
Yeah.
does.
I would say that if I was to tier that, it would be like bass players number one,
Mhm.
then keyboard players number two,
Yes.
rhythm guitar players who have no interest in playing like solos, probably number three, and the rest of them, lead guitar players, vocalists, drummers, it's like a mile between the rhythm guitar player and the rest of them.
You look at the guitar player, like the smaller his pedal board is, the better front of house engineer he's going to
I
be.
would actually rather have an LD mix a record than a lead guitar player.
An
Like,
LD?
I'd rather have a lighting director.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, I'd rather have my tour's lighting director mix a record over a lead guitar player any day.
We're definitely putting that as like the front part of
Yeah,
the reel.
yeah.
It's
Please,
perfect.
please do.
You're a content machine, Brian. You know
Yeah,
the
thanks.
TikTok algorithm. You're in the walls, man.
Yeah,
Well, we're at 45 minutes. I'm really happy with this conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot as a guy who makes microphone, I think that I tend to get philosophical in these conversations, and the thinking
Sure.
holistically really strikes me as a microphone guy because, like, yeah, the
Yeah.
capsule's the most important, part that makes the biggest difference in a microphone sound. But I think people
Hmm.
don't appreciate how much all the little decisions tend to add up in a microphone design.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and it makes me so happy, like, seeing the V44S on the Grammys
Hmm.
with Olivia was so cool. That, like, made my year, man. So I appreciate you.
Well, it was my pleasure. And then Paul Hager also brought one out with Miley.
With Miley, yeah, there were
Yeah.
there were multiple V44S sightings, and Gabby Moreno, who won a
Mm.
Grammy, was one of the
Yep.
earliest V13 adopters that we have. She has serial number like 60 or something like that. And she
Really.
uses it all the time still. She's fantastic. So that was really cool to
Yeah.
see her perform and then win a Grammy too. It was
Sure.
a Vanguard Grammy, and you know, I don't typically get too big for my britches, but I'm very here for that. So
Well, I have a shopping list for next year that includes a couple of V1s and a couple of V4s for the drums. So
I will
that'll
I will
probably
tell you that
come
we have
January.
lots of V4s, and
Yep.
as far as V1s go, we got our first tin, like, it was basically the manufacturing sample for the metalwork.
Hmm.
And I told Curtis and Kate, I said, okay, start building these by hand and set aside four
Hmm.
for Brian. So you might be getting some of the
Okay.
earliest ones.
Great.
And
Are these the
yeah,
Gen 2s, right?
these are the Gen 2s.
Great.
They have a couple. The very specific upgrades are the same upgrade we did to the resistors and the Gen 1s of the V13s and everything versus
Hmm.
the Gen 2s, which are like an audiophile grade, higher grade resistor, lower
Great.
noise. And the lower noise floor really does make a difference in, like, getting the detail, hearing that
Yeah.
detail that's really down deep in there. And then the other part is we upgraded the transistor as well. So it's a dual monolithic transistor, which,
Mm.
one, equals even lower noise floor, and two,
Sure.
deals with um, certain voltage situations, specifically the voltage situation we found where people who didn't know what they were doing were changing the capsule while the phantom power was on. And
Yeah.
lovely giant
Oh,
voltage spikes into the gate of the
sure.
JFET. So
Yeah.
derating the JFET over time, always a good thing for a microphone. So,
Great.
but yeah, we're really excited with how they sound. We also changed the
Great.
construction to be more durable, which will probably be useful to you as a live sound guy. So I'm super
Yeah.
excited for them. And I just put on Instagram today, like, would anybody be interested in, like, a limited run of, like, tube versions of these? And I got a couple responses. So I just started working on the PCB this afternoon for some hand built tube ones, just for giggles.
Really.
Yeah,
Now is that for the V1s?
that's for the. It's going to be V1. I might call it the V1T because they're already laser engraved or something like that. But yeah,
Those have FET circuitry in them, right?
the V1s do. But I'm going to make a tube
Yeah.
one too, just for my
Great.
own. I get a kick out of building stuff and making something
Sure, of
new.
course.
So that's my.
Well, I gotta put this out there because growing up and when I was younger,
Mhm,
I'd be in studios and all the microphones you had access to that were like really high quality microphones were built a generation before I was even
mhm,
involved in this. And then there was this long period where like mics weren't manufactured that way. And mics they I don't know if there was just a lack of interest, if there was a thing of scarcity equals value that kind of used to keep people from that people just didn't bother making stuff because they're like, well, that makes my stuff more expensive now because it's so
mhm,
rare. And I'm really grateful nowadays to see so many mic companies out there, startups, starting up, however recently you guys started up, or some of these other brands that I'm seeing around that are making microphones to the same quality specifications as were made back in the day, but actually upgrading them so they're less noisy, they're more durable, they last longer, and it's becoming more accessible to guys like me who like I'm on my own budget. Like I
mhm,
can't spend 20 grand on a microphone. But if I'm going to get just as good a sonic quality out of something that's at like, a better price point that you guys are still making by hand and still taking that same level of pride in, then I fully support that. And I appreciate what you guys are doing as a mic manufacturer. It's really fantastic to put out that level of quality, that I have access to. and I appreciate that.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Like we just make tools ultimately, and I always try and think about it that
Of
way. We make
course.
paintbrushes for artists, so like we make the tools, you guys make the magic.
Yeah.
And I wasn't good enough at making the magic as a musician, and I didn't spend long enough trying to make the magic as an engineer to like do that. But
Yeah.
this is where I found my happy place, is just like tinkering. Over to my left is like my little
Yeah.
home shop where I do all my mic
Sure.
repair and then like some of the development. And that's where I get my joy, and
Hmm.
you get your joy running live sound, and other people get their joy, in the studio. And that's, let's not yuck anybody's yum. Um,
Well, I mean,
yeah,
I just am expressing my gratitude for it because it seems like
yeah.
there was this large kind of gap in time that, that kind of care and appreciation for the craft of building these microphones just didn't really exist.
Mm.
And now it does. And I'm glad that you guys are making good mics and I like to use them and they sound great.
I am looking
And
forward
I
to seeing more Vanguards on the next Olivia tour, or whatever you end up doing
and I
next year.
spread the word too. Like I'm telling people, Josiah at SNL has one now.
Hmm.
So, it's like I really think it's important for, the word of mouth to get people, it's like Christina turning me onto the V44S,
Hmm.
So
I think without guys like you, we probably wouldn't sell very many, like it, because people who are semi pros or prosumer, I believe is what they call the market, which I think is a ridiculous
yeah.
expression. But like, you know, people look to what guys like you who are doing this every day for a living, and that's what a lot of
Hmm.
music, people in the music industry aspire to do. um,
Sure.
they look to what you guys do with and what tools you choose. So it means a lot
Yeah.
to us that you are willing to take a studio mic out on the road.
Yeah.
The circus that
Yeah.
is a mic traveling all over the world, however many countries you guys hit, and
Yeah.
nailing it
There's
for
a
all the
fair amount.
shows. So that makes, I'm
Yeah.
also like, personally very, very relieved and happy that it did all that without giving you
Yeah.
grief. Because like I always
Of
get so
course.
nervous about that sort of thing. So
Well, I mean, I yeah, I just, I'm glad the mic held up for the whole tour. It sounded great. It ended up on the the Netflix special on the drums. So, that was I basically leaned on that mic for the drums. So
I appreciate it, dude. Well, with that, I
yeah,
think we'll wrap it up. And thank you so much,
great.
Brian, for your time. It's great to actually, like, I think this is the first time you and I have ever like actually talked with our voices rather than on email. So
I think so, yeah. So
are you gonna
it's
are
been
you
an absolute pleasure.
yeah, absolutely. Are you gonna be at NAM?
I will be.
Okay.
I'm currently available and open. So I was planning. I actually, you know what? I just bought my pass. To be honest, I just bought my pass.